There are things we can do to counter this, to educate ourselves, and to get active. So that's the point of this whole thing, is to give you education, to give you a plug-in, and in a way to overcome this, something to work toward, that we don't all just sit and get angry and do nothing. So again, thank you very much for coming. A couple of notes for you. You're here, so there are more meetings. There are always more meetings. July 11th, Monday, July 11th at 5:30, the Women's Caucus is meeting here in this room. Women's Caucus is a very broad caucus. Men can come. Everybody, please come. July 14th at 5:30 is our general Virgin County Democratic Party meeting. Again, right here, please come. July 14th. Monday, July 18th at 6:30, the Young Democrats are meeting, a new group. They asked me to join. I said, I'm over 40. I don't think I can. But please come. Please come. Yes.
I just want to say on that July 11th, the Chair Jameson, who's running for the Ohio State Party.
Okay.
Also extended an invitation to Jennifer Bloom and President Zayas. The three sisters-in-law.
Okay.
Running.
So we will have
So
candidates.
we may have all of them, and I believe Trice Evans is also going to speak.
Okay. Numerous wonderful candidates for Supreme Court and others will be at that July 11th meeting. So please, if you're here now, thank you for coming. If you've never been here, keep coming. There's much more to plug into. Just real brief, I'd like to introduce our speakers tonight. So we have J.C. Elgin from the Shelby Democrats. We have Cole Boydach from Pro-Choice Ohio. They'll each be giving about a 20-minute talk. JC will be reviewing the case law and how we got here. And he's actually typed out notes for you like a good professor. You can take notes in the margin. And then Cole will be speaking about Pro-Choice Ohio's action plans, about, how do you talk about this to other people? And it is very important that we all start speaking the same language. She'll run us through that. She'll run us through what's going on actively right now with Pro-Choice Ohio, what you can do, how we can plug in. So they're each going to speak about 20 minutes, and then they're going to take questions. So please, as they're speaking, take those pens, and they have a couple at each table. Write down your questions. If somebody says something that you don't quite understand or you'd like them to drill down a little bit more on, write it down and ask them at the end of this session. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce our chairperson, Larry Weiber.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you for putting all this together. The good news is you're not going to listen to me for 20 minutes. I just want to, first of all, welcome everyone here. It is great to see so many faces, and it's even better to see so many faces that I have no idea who you are. That is awesome, and I hope that continues. The hypocrisy of these people is unbelievable, mind-blowing. Just 1 year ago, most of these people were all running around going, my body, my choice. You're not giving me a shot. Now doesn't matter. It's your body, their choice. That's ridiculous. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter. The last person on earth that I want making decisions for my 4-year-old granddaughter is the classic old white man sitting in Washington. I don't want that. That is not right. It should be. My comments are short. I would love to see all of you here on the second Monday, the second Thursday. Every meeting we have, it would be great to have this room full of people. And it is so important. If you're not registered to vote, get registered to vote and vote. If you know people who are not registered to vote, help them get registered to vote. Help whatever you can do to get them to vote. We have got to get this turned around. We've got to get to. We are going so far backwards. It's mind blowing. It's utterly mind blowing. So I welcome all of you, and I hope to see you many more times here. Thank you.
Oh, like everybody for being here. Attorneys start with a disclaimer, and I'll start with that as well. I am not a.
We can't hear you.
All right, how about there?
You might have to hold it.
I don't have that projecting voice that Joel has. How about there? A little better? Well, let me just. We'll try just holding it. How about there?
That's better.
I'll start with a disclaimer that I'm not a person who has a uterus. I'm not purporting to be an expert on any topic that involves a person who has a uterus, nor do I purport to be a medical expert. My comments today are limited to my practice areas as a member of the bar, as a person who's been, and that's what we talk about. I see at least 3 other people in the room that have been to law school, so this will be a review for the 3 of you, and a quick introduction for everyone else. These topics, personal freedoms, fundamental rights, lawyers in law school spend half a year studying in your 2nd year of law school. These are inherently complex topics. So in 20 minutes, we're going to have a very high level overview, but I think it's important to explain the legal background so that you can appreciate what may have been defects in the original Roe decision and why we are where we are today and what potentially that means for the future. Well, I'm going to start going over some jurisprudence on due process and equal protection. When we're talking about rights and fundamental rights, those are the 2 most invoked clauses of the Constitution: due process, equal protection. As you'll see as we're going through these cases, even the case law out there confuses these 2 concepts, misstates these concepts. These are not clear-cut, well-defined concepts. And for political purposes, and I will, hopefully one of the takeaways you'll have here is that the Supreme Court is a political body. It is not a court of law. It is established through political means, and the decisions are political decisions. But for political purposes, some of this jurisprudence is purposefully muddied. It's purposefully muddied to reach political ends. And I think that's what we're going to find when we talk about the Dobbs case and the cases leading up to it. So I'll keep it short and sweet. I know not everybody wants to be a lawyer, not everybody wants to go to law school, but I think it's important to have this background just so you can understand what Dobbs really means, and maybe we can start talking about what it's going to mean for some related rights. I'll start with reproductive justice. That's the term that I chose to use. I think our other speakers can use some different terms. The idea behind reproductive justice is more than abortion. Abortion is a big part of reproductive justice. Reproductive justice, I always use the definition that I wrote in law school. Reproductive justice will exist when all people can exercise the rights and access the resources they need to thrive and decide if, when, and how to create and sustain families with dignity, free from discrimination, coercion, and violence. Okay, that incorporates access to abortion, that incorporates domestic violence, safety from domestic violence, safety from forced abortion, safety for same-sex couples, and the idea that you can form the family in the idiom and the way that matters most to you in your life. That's the idea of reproductive justice. Obviously, the focus here is going to be on the abortion cases, but that's kind of the background that I want to throw out here. These concepts are interrelated. There's no way to talk about one without talking about them all. So I'll start on the handout, and you got the due process, equal protection side. We'll run through due process first. This is coming from the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment was after the Civil War with the Reconstruction Amendments. There at the top, you see this clause that we're talking about. No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay? So what are the rights we're talking about? If we can tie it to life, liberty, or property, we're talking about due process. Due process has 2 prongs. Due process has procedural due process. And what we're looking at in procedural due process was, did they give enough notice, enough procedures that the government action was fair? Okay, so when we're talking about that, we're looking at basically 2 things: notice and opportunity to be heard. So if the government is going to take an adverse action to one of your life, liberty, or property rights, they have to give you notice, and you have to have the opportunity to be heard about it. Now, there's lots of nuance to this. You have to have notice before they act, or can you get notice after they act? Those are all things that lawyers can discuss and debate. But the idea behind procedural due process is, I didn't get enough procedural protection for my rights. The remedy for a procedural due process claim is more procedure. So if my procedure was denied, if the court determines that I should have had more procedural protections, the remedy is you get more procedural protections. Where this came up a lot was termination of benefits. If you were on SNAP benefits, do they have to give you notice before they terminate those SNAP benefits? Or is it sufficient that they can give you notice after they were terminated? Those are the kinds of cases we're talking about, due process cases. In what we're going to talk about today, there's not much procedural due process. We're on the other side, which is substantive. Substantive due process is the policies underlying government action, are they appropriate? And there's different levels of, what types of action are more or less appropriate, but that's the kind of idea, is when the government is depriving a right, are they doing it in a way that's constitutionally permissible? The policies underlying it are fair. Do they afford due process at all? So we're looking at substantive due process, and this is more relevant to what we're talking about. Substantive due process can either affect a fundamental right or a non-fundamental right. If we're talking about a non-fundamental right, then all the government has to show is that they had a rational basis acting. So if we're talking about driver's license restrictions and the court taking your driver's license because you didn't pay your fines, you didn't do that, that's not a protected right. You don't have a constitutional right to a driver's license. That's when we're in a rational basis. Does the government have a rational basis for acting? The other piece of the non-fundamental rights is the government action is presumed valid. It is on you as the citizen to demonstrate that the government action is invalid, that it is not protective of your due process. A fundamental right, on the other hand, they have a three-part test they have to establish. And by the way, it's presumed that it is an abuse of the Constitution. It is presumed that the government action is incorrect. It is on the government to establish that all three elements. The elements the governments have to show is that their action has a compelling government interest, that it was narrowly tailored to meet that interest, and that it was the least restrictive measure in which to meet that interest. So when we're talking about fundamental rights, freedom of speech, freedom to vote, when the government restricts those, they need to meet all three of those tests in order to be constitutionally valid under the due process clause. So when we're looking at those kinds of things, we're running through that test. What do we mean by fundamental rights? That's the whole point of Dobbs, is what do we mean by fundamental rights? There are enumerated rights that really nobody argues. What's listed in the Constitution, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of assembly, those are fundamental rights that nobody really argues that the government can, without triggering strict scrutiny. When we're talking about abortion, or we're talking about privacy, those are non-enumerated rights, meaning those aren't rights that you're going to pick up your Constitution and find written in there. That's where the debate is, and that's where Dobbs overturns Roe, which we'll get to. But listed there, you'll see the fundamental rights. Particularly, you won't see abortion listed on there because that's kind of the point of this whole line of cases, is that abortion was never formally declared a fundamental. You'll also see the incorporation doctrine there. That just means that all this stuff applies. All the federal protections apply to the state protections apply to the feds. That's the idea. So even though the 14th Amendment says states, when you look in the 5th Amendment, it also says all this stuff applies to the federal government as well. Okay, halfway through, that was easy. Equal protection. This is the other term you're going to hear all the time. Now, bonus on equal protection, the strict scrutiny is the same rules that we just talked about. Compelling government interest, narrowly tailored, and least restricted. There are three levels of review when we're looking at equal protection. We're looking at strict scrutiny. Again, the government action is presumed invalid. Intermediate scrutiny, government action is presumed invalid, and rational basis, government action is presumed valid. There are different classifications that trigger different levels of scrutiny. If it is a member of a suspect class that is being discriminated against, for example, a race-based discrimination, that triggers strict scrutiny. The government has to show there's a compelling reason to do it, it was narrowly tailored, and it was least restrictive. Also, when we're talking about a fundamental right, we're triggering strict scrutiny. Same analysis. Two categories, protected class and fundamental right. That's when strict scrutiny comes into play in the equal protection world. Intermediate scrutiny, this is amorphous. Some scholars will say there is no such thing as intermediate scrutiny. Some will say there's all sorts of intermediate scrutiny. The idea is it's a quasi-suspect class. It's a class that historically has been marginalized. The examples you see there are sex-based discrimination. So most of your sex and gender-based discrimination are intermediate scrutiny, and illegitimacy. So your status as a child of an unwed mother was analyzed under that. We're not really going to get into intermediate scrutiny other than to say it's more than rational basis, but it's less than strict scrutiny. It has to further an important government interest, and the means have to be substantially related to that government interest, but it doesn't have to be compelling, it doesn't have to be narrowly tailored, and it doesn't have to be least restrictive. The idea with intermediate is there's a level between strict scrutiny and rational basis. Everybody else, all other classes of people, and all other rights are evaluated under rational basis. That's the last test, rationally related to a legitimate government interest. Okay. Once you hit rational basis, the law is going to be upheld. There are very few laws that are overturned on a rational basis argument. Let's turn over to the cases, run through the cases. I don't even know where we're at time-wise. Oh, lots of time. We're at 10 minutes. All right, halfway through, 10 minutes. First one I want to point out is Skinner versus Oklahoma, 1942. Skinner versus Oklahoma was the idea that if you committed a certain number of certain enumerated crimes, the government could sterilize. It was the state of Oklahoma that was doing this. They determined that there is some right that the equal protection clause, there was an equal protection violation here. There's some right. The case doesn't really name that right very well. Some suggest it's the right to procreation, the right to have a family, but the idea was that the state sterilizing an individual because they committed crimes was a violation of the equal protection. The dissent in that case said, yes, this is still wrong, but it's a due process problem. They need more procedure before it's you know, that was the dissent though. So that's not the one carried. The carried law was the equal protection. Griswold v. Connecticut, this is an important case. This was the front runner to Roe v. Wade. Griswold v. Connecticut was about a married couple's right to have access to contraception. And what the court determined in that case was that a right to privacy, spatial privacy, privacy within the confines of your bedroom exists under the Constitution. And if you look in the Constitution, it doesn't say you have right to privacy in your bedroom. Actually, it doesn't say you have a right to privacy, short of the Fourth Amendment legal search and seizure. But they argued that in the penumbras and shadows of these cases, in the penumbras and shadows, there exists certain rights. And one of those rights is the right to privacy. In Griswold v. Connecticut, we are already setting up contraception as a matter of privacy. That's the fundamental right we're identifying here. When we're evaluating these cases, we're looking for government action and what's the fundamental right. So Griswold is setting up privacy as the fundamental right. You can see the concurring, Goldberg is saying that it's not penumbras and shadows, it's clear under the 9th and 14th Amendment. Harlan was saying this is due process liberty. And Black and Stewart were saying there's no right to privacy under the Constitution. Even then in Griswold, this was controversial. There were problems with the case. Then we come Roe v. Wade, which is the one that everyone knows. I end up losing my microphone a little bit. Okay. Roe v. Wade says, again, that access to abortion is a matter of the right to privacy. So Roe v. Wade was based on that right to privacy, which comes from the shadows and penumbras of the Constitution. There's a few different reasons why they passed it this way, but one of the ways was they could get a consensus on the court if they put it under the right to privacy. And abortion is about the right to privacy between you and your doctor, the right to privacy between you and your spouse, the right to privacy of you and the sexual partner situation. So, right to privacy is a fundamental right. Fundamental right, we're under strict scrutiny, right? So if we're under strict scrutiny, compelling government interest, narrowly tailored, least restrictive alternative. Now, the way the court squared this was they came up with the trimester system that you probably have heard of before if you've heard about Roe. First trimester system, no state regulation. Okay, strict scrutiny says no. Second, you can regulate if it's related to the maternal health. And then third trimester, you can regulate entirely. This was the law for about 20 years. The the recognition that the right to privacy was a fundamental right protected by the Constitution was what carried Roe for 20 years. Then Casey came along. You know, when people talk about Dobbs, the first thing I point out is Roe versus Wade was already overturned. Planned Parenthood versus Casey already overturned Roe v. Wade. This was the conservatives' first attempt at knocking Roe out. Basically, what they said, they've abandoned strict scrutiny. They're saying that this idea that the right to privacy and abortion are tied together as a fundamental right, we're not buying that anymore. Now we're going to raise it to something a little bit more than rational basis, but less than strict scrutiny. They came up with the undue burden test, which was the law until last week. The undue burden test was the idea that the state can't put undue obstacles in the way of obtaining an abortion. That was the compromise that came in the 90s. Again, another compromise, political compromise, in order to keep the right to abortion. In that case, though, they talk about the status. You know, it made it clear in case that we're not talking about whether the right to privacy is a fundamental right now. We're talking about abortion. And is abortion a protected? That's where the shift happens. We're no longer talking about the right to privacy. Now we're talking about a narrower issue of abortion. We'll fast forward a little bit to Dobbs. Dobbs, the act that came out last week. And what does it say all throughout Dobbs? It's not about privacy at all. It's about the fundamental right to abortion. The tactic here that the conservative justices used actually came right from the dissent of Casey. The dissent, Scalia's dissent of Casey was the Dodd opinion. And the idea is, if we narrow the topic narrow enough, we're not going to be able to find it in the Constitution. So we're not talking about privacy anymore. We're talking about the right to abortion. All of a sudden, we can say, well, if I look at the text of the Constitution, nowhere in the text of the Constitution does it say there's a right to abortion. So why would that be a fundamental right? What God does is put the name on the coffin of the fundamental right idea, that abortion is a fundamental right. Now that it's not a fundamental right, we're under a rational basis test. What happens under rational basis? The law is going to be upheld. And that's really how Dobbs takes out Roe v. Wade in this case. That there's not, you know, from the beginning, if we had a stronger foundation as to the source of the right to an abortion, it would have been much harder for Dobbs to knock out the abortion cases. But since it was reframed and reframed, first, we were talking generally about privacy, which was easy to palate in the 70s. We could, you know, nobody wants to say you don't have a right to privacy in the Constitution. That opened the door to allowing us now to restrict and train it. So the other thing that happened in the intermediate time is that we were talking about the fundamental liberty interest. Well, in 1997, a case came out that said, well, we're reading fundamental rights wrong. Fundamental rights are really rights that are deeply rooted in nature. And if you want to think about which side of the spectrum came up with that theory, fundamental rights are deeply rooted in nature's history. That came out of a case called Washington versus Foxford. That was the assisted suicide. In the assisted suicide case, so there's no right to assisted suicide. Our nation in 200 years has never had a right to assisted suicide. That's the reasoning they used in Dobbs. They said, looking at a right to abortion, the text doesn't have a right to abortion. And in our history of our country, there hasn't been a tradition of abortion, which, if you read some of the articles, they have that all wrong too. But the idea is our Supreme Court's not a history professor. We don't want the Supreme Court to be a historian. We want them to interpret the law. What did Dobbs miss? So what did Dobbs do? Dobbs said no fundamental right. No fundamental right means no due process claim, no equal protection claim. Can anybody see what Dobbs is missing? Protected class. Okay, Dobbs doesn't identify any class upon which is being discriminated. So one of the paths forward is a class-based discrimination. And I would suggest that we can do more than just simply a class based on sex or a class based on race. You know, one of the things that we talked a lot about with Law Students for Reproductive Justice is intersectionality. At the intersections of our identities that oppression takes place. Okay, women can be oppressed, people in poverty can be oppressed, but women in poverty are disproportionately oppressed. And that is what I would suggest could be a class-based distinction that could trigger strict scrutiny. I don't think at the federal level, we're gonna see that again. I think that this opinion clearly relegates this to be a states' rights issue. I don't think we're going to have a federal control over abortion any longer, which makes state level offices so much more important. And I'm gonna let the other folks talk to you about that, but I just, one of the messages I want to get across is that we cannot let local races go unopposed. We have state representative office that is going unopposed to the conservative side right now, and it's horrible. I wish we had somebody in that position. But the importance of the state house just went up tenfold. Now, briefly, I'm almost over time. Briefly, I want to talk about same-sex marriage, because a lot of people have a lot of concern. What I'll point out on Obergefell is that that decision was decided on two bases: due process and equal protection. And in Obergefell, they're talking about language like individual autonomy, the right to have a family. Okay, what we don't see in the Obergefell decision, the same-sex marriage decision, we never see a reference to privacy. The right to privacy is past. That's the right to privacy is dead. Right? But the people that drafted Obergefell were anticipating the fall. Okay, they were identifying other fundamental rights to tie to same-sex marriage. And the strategy is going to be the same for the conservatives. They're going to take the right to marriage and narrow it to the right to same-sex marriage. And they're going to say, our nation's history doesn't have same-sex marriage, or the Constitution doesn't have same-sex marriage, therefore we need to throw it out. But the problem with that argument is we have the protected class argument, and we have other fundamental rights that I think would be inpalatable to declare as non-fundamental rights, such as the right to marriage. Clarence Thomas, I think, was kind of a coward. Because he listed all those rights
And
that he thinks needs to be revisited. And the one that he left out was Loving West Virginia.
Yes.
And Loving West Virginia is based on the same rationale as every one of those other rights.
Yeah.
So instead of hiding it and pretending like it's not what you're doing, he should have just named it. Okay, if anyone doesn't know, Clarence Thomas is married to a white woman. He's a black man. Loving West Virginia was an anti-discrimination law so that black people and white people can't be married. Okay. Toppling Obergefell, toppling those other cases are going to topple Loving West Virginia. So I think that's a big problem. Okay. There's no challenge right now to same-sex marriage before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court's on recess to talk. I would anticipate. I would anticipate likely there will be a challenge. Remember, Roe took 40 years to topple. There's a pattern with Brown v. Board of Education. Roe, large pronouncement of rights, and then slowly chipping
Eroded.
I think it would be shocking. This is just my opinion, one person's opinion. I think it would be shocking to see Obergefell within the confines of our current legal structure. So certainly the things that you need to do, if you're in a same-sex marriage, if you're in a non-same-sex marriage, are the same. You need to have things in place. You need to have powers of attorney. You need to have healthcare powers of attorney. You need to have trusts. You need to have wills. Those are all good things to have no matter what. But if you are in a same-sex marriage and you're having that hesitation, that's how you can gain some amount of security, is to take care of those documents. Any attorney, it's not a plug for myself. I'm not allowed to advertise that person, but any attorney can help you do that. But like I said, I think Obergefell is a long way off. There are some other rights though that are nearer. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our other speakers to talk about what we can do. I kind of gave you the doom and gloom of where we're at. But hopefully that's your mini law school. Y'all can go home and have your Facebook JDs now.
Just a note about the mic.
Yeah.
Have to hold it a little more.
I can do that. I'm gonna.
It's a. Okay.
All right. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
All right.
All right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, hi, my name is Cole. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the statewide field manager for Pro-Choice Ohio. I'm also a clinic escort for an abortion clinic in Columbus. And I am also only here today because my mother had 2 abortions 30 plus odd years ago. And I really like to start my intro with that because I'm going to be A, saying the word abortion a lot, and B, want to declare this as a space where folks, if they want to share their perspectives and their, stories, like I am a safe person to do that with, and we need to be encouraging folks to do that. So, briefly, I'm going to go through like what my org is because there are a number of repro orgs that work across the state, and so I want folks to know kind of the lay of the land. And then I'm going to talk about the literal lay of the land. It's been, I don't know if y'all have heard, it's been a little bit of a crazy week. So I'm going to talk about that briefly. And then also just going to talk about how we can plug into this work and how we can do that effectively and also sustainably. I've been saying for a long time, and I'm going to be saying it for a long time more, this is a marathon, not a sprint. We heard 40 years. Yeah, we're going to be clawing back access hopefully long before then, but it's not going to be an overnight fight. So my organization is called Pro-Choice Ohio. Those in the room might be familiar with our former name, NARAL Pro-Choice Ohio. So I like to connect that dot. Late last year, actually at the turn of the year, we disaffiliated from our national office. So we are now just Pro-Choice Ohio. We are Ohio run, Ohio based. We were beforehand. So like nothing's different, just the name. Same people doing the same work, just extra committed to the state of Ohio. And so what my org does is we are committed to develop and sustain a constituency, that's y'all, that uses the political process to guarantee every Ohioan the right to make personal decisions regarding a full range of reproductive choices, including preventing unintended pregnancy, bearing healthy children, and also choosing abortion. And so that talks about some of the aspects of reproductive freedom and also some of the intersections of reproductive justice that were discussed previously. I do want to be very clear. So my organization is a historically white-led org and is currently white-led. And so we do reproductive rights work in the spirit of and in the hopes of striving towards a reproductive justice framework. That work is led by Black and Brown women and femme folks, and we need to make sure that we are honoring and centering them as we move forward in this work and in this next chapter post-Roe. One of the things that I like to talk about very briefly before I jump in, like, I gotta say, I've heard a lot of leaders talk about this stuff for a long, long time, and that was probably one of the best ways. Do a really good job and like honest and tying some of those political routes through and through. They're really important when we're looking at this work on a macro and a micro level. And so with that, set me up perfectly to say Roe was and always has been the floor. Roe was never good enough to ensure that every person that needed access to abortion care received it. We know that before Roe, Black and Brown Ohioans did not have access to abortion care at the rates that it was needed. We know that post-Roe, those same communities are going to be the most impacted because folks aren't able to travel out of state, miss a day of work. If you are working an hourly job, how are you going to take off 1, 2, 3 days? How are you going to afford childcare, transportation? It's not always the procedure itself, but it's the associated costs of accessing that care, but also fundamentally disrupting your life for a day, right? Like you got to take off work at least. And for most of us, I think for a lot of the uterus owners in family structures, a lot of those folks kind of handle the business. So you don't have to get your own self set. You have to get your other kids set. You have to make sure, the dogs are taken care of. And so just understanding that when we're talking about access to care and when we're talking about access to abortion, we're not just talking about like walking into the clinic, though that is often made a lot harder by the friends that stand outside. We could talk about that for hours in my escorting hat on. But just all of the other things that take for folks to access their rights to bodily autonomy. So moving on to a little bit about what my org does in particular. So we have a C3 arm, a C4 arm, and also a PAC. So we kind of get to do whatever we want, which is very nice. Just have to make sure we're coding it right. So we mainly focus on policy and legislation. So a lot of the time you'll see us at the State House. I'm sure many of you have heard my boss, Jeannie Miracle, giving fire testimony and taking some of those, it's been a long day, I don't have good words, some of those people at the State House to task over misrepresenting what their constituents want and need from their elected officials. So that's a big part of what we do. We are also one of the kind of leading policy experts in helping craft legislation. And also doing that work on a local level as well. We've really, as we've talked about, the State House is, again, the State House. And so really looking to the local level, and the local elections, both city, municipal, and county-wide, are hugely important. I am a personal local government stan. I did my whole career up to this point in local government and local politics. And so was brought on because that is what we're focusing. While also fighting battles that need to be fought at the State House, because we can't let any front of this war go unchallenged. We also do a lot of grassroots organizing. That is primarily the responsibility of myself and my team. We are meeting folks where they are at, literally and also figuratively. In the last week, we were in Yellow Springs, Salina, I'm going to miss places, Yellow Springs, Salina, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton, Cuyahoga County. I'm here tonight. So we really do mean it, and we want y'all to call on us if you need us. This is the part of my job that I love the most, and it's the same for my team. If we can be coming and talking to y'all, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we offer in terms of training. But if there's anywhere that y'all want us to go that you think it's worth it to have someone there, we're probably going to believe you. We fundamentally believe that y'all are the best ones to organize in your communities. We just want to give you the tools and language to do it. We are an 11-person team total. My field team statewide is me and 2 other people. So we literally cannot do this. We also do electoral activity. So we do candidate endorsements. Keep eyes peeled for that. We're hoping to get that all going for November here very soon. And it is our commitment to not only help identify pro-choice and actually pro-abortion candidates, but also to help recruit volunteers and turn folks out. So gonna probably be talking to more folks about that, and you'll probably be seeing us around more. But then we also do public education. That's a little bit more in line with what I'm doing tonight. Just coming and kind of giving the lay of the land, giving the options on the table, and just kind of giving folks the info they need. This stuff is highly complicated. We got taken to law school today for it. And this is something that anyone in this room can do if you have the materials to do it. And so please, for the love of God, let us give you the materials to do it. Okay. So Ohio and where we're at. So as of, I have yet to do this once without crying. So we're gonna see. So as of last Friday, at around 10 a.m., the Supreme Court delivered the Dobbs v. Jackson case, which fundamentally overturned the protections guaranteed in Roe and Casey. We knew this was coming, right? The leak happened, that unprecedented Supreme Court leak. Who else is tired of living through unprecedented times? Can we just settle down? And I just really like to take a nap and turn on the news and be like, oh, that's happened before. So we knew this was coming with the leak. We knew this was coming before the leak. The folks doing this work and the folks in the clinics have been preparing for this for years. Black women have been telling us that this has been coming since Roe was literally enacted the first time. So we've known, and also that doesn't change the fact of reading it, right? And then 4 hours later, so almost immediately, the Ohio Attorney General, Dave Yost, quick round of boos for him. Immediately petitioned the state to take off an injunction on a what is colloquially known as a 6-week ban. So it's not technically 6 weeks. It is a ban on the termination of a pregnancy anytime after cardiac fetal activity is detected. It's called the heartbeat, but I don't even like to say it out loud because it's literally not a heartbeat. And I was a public health major and I hate medical misinformation, and it's not a heartbeat. But that happens around 6 weeks of pregnancy. Most folks don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks unless you are trying to get pregnant or regularly testing or as paranoid about your reproductive system as I am. Like, you're likely not going to know. So what does that mean? That means that 9 clinics in Ohio are still providing abortion care up to 6 weeks gestation. We only have 9 clinics in Ohio, so that's all of them. So that's actually a good percentage. And I'll be plugging some resources for like what clinics those are and all of that. And I'm going to follow up with links and all of that. So please don't feel like you have to be scribbling as we go. So all 9 clinics in the state of Ohio are currently still scheduling patients for abortion care up to 6 weeks. And we have a number of organizations working together to get folks out of state if they need to go out of state. Before that decision came down, our patient navigators at our abortion funds in Ohio and in the rest of the Midwest were already looking at this infrastructure from a regional basis. So they have been preparing, they are getting folks where they need to go. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later. But that is why abortion funds are so important to our infrastructure, not only in Ohio, not only in the Midwest, but nationally. So bottom line, folks are still able to access care in Ohio. If you think you might be pregnant, please call a clinic. You know, if you have a positive pregnancy test, it is still worth trying to get in an Ohio clinic. The sooner you call, the easier it is to get folks in. But also know that, you know, if you or a loved one is already past that mark, there are still options and we can still connect folks to those resources. The one thing that's not going to stop happening is us getting Ohioans access to abortion care. Woo! I get to be here talking to y'all about this right now because my counterparts at all of the funds have been working for weeks and weeks and weeks straight. And so I get to come talk to y'all and they're still on the ground doing the work. And so any spare like moment, thought, good vibes, please send it to your local abortion organizer. Folks need it. So what this means currently is that, you know, nothing has happened yet with birth control regulations. You know, nothing has happened with anything other than accessing the termination of a pregnancy after 6 weeks. Other than that, Ohio law remains the same. The General Assembly is also on recess along with the Supreme Court. Super happy about that one too. So they're not going to be back until lame duck, which means after the November elections. And I'm a level with y'all because y'all are people in the know. If November goes well for us, well, if November does not go well for us, we are screwed in lame duck. It's gonna be a crazy batch of awful on abortion and also on queer rights and trans rights and any other thing that they can put on their plate right now, right? If we win in November, I can't even imagine the depths that they're going to go to and the bottoms of the barrels that they're going to be scraping. And so we need to make sure that as we're thinking about organizing, we are getting ready for November. We're getting ready for August, first of all. We're getting ready for November, and then we have to turn right back around and play some pretty hard defense at the state. So that's kind of the rest of the year. One quick update. So we have seen across the country some bans getting injunctions put back on them that are in similar style to the Ohio 6-week ban. And we have actually, the movement as a whole. So specifically the ACLU, Planned Parenthood Federation of America, on behalf of their clinics in the state, and a couple of other provider plaintiffs have filed to have an injunction placed back on the 6-week ban. That case, folks were asked for documents by like 1 o'clock today, so we could hear at this point, probably not tonight, but during business hours any minute. And when that comes down, that will likely take immediate effect. So make sure that you are, I'm going to do a quick social media plug. I promise I'm not going to like millennial up here the whole time. But if you make sure to follow ACLU, Pro-Choice Ohio, Women Have Options Ohio on Instagram and Twitter, those are where the most up-to-date info usually gets out first. Or a little bit faster than the press sometimes, which I'm very proud of. Okay. Okay. So Ohio is a thing, and here's where we're at. So what can we all do about it? right? Many things, don't you worry. First and foremost, we are not even a week out from this decision, and we are asking people to please, if you're gonna donate to abortion funds first. As I talked about, those are the organizations that are doing the work to connect people to care and help facilitate that care. And they do that outside of networks that are typically really inaccessible. So they are able to capture everyone who needs abortion care in a way that like sometimes our traditional medical system can't, or other things like that. So please, if you have cash to give, please give it to one of the 3 state of Ohio-based abortion funds. There's Women Have Options, which is statewide. So folks accessing care in this part of the state would probably be covered by Women Have Options. But then also Preterm up in Cleveland has an abortion fund, and then also Aggie Fund up in Toledo. I will make sure that folks get these links after the fact. And then also you can donate directly to clinics. And so there's 9 clinics in the state, including 3 Planned Parenthood clinics. And so folks can donate directly to those as well. We also are, looking ahead to November. We alluded to the state Supreme Court a little bit, but like I cannot overstate the importance of that race in this landscape. Pretty much we will still have a veto-proof. We will still have a Republican veto-proof supermajority in the state house. And so yes, we need Nan in the governor's office, and also vetoes can still get overridden. You know, it can't get overridden, Supreme Court of the United States. Oh, nope, sorry, Supreme Court of Ohio. And also the Supreme Court of the United States, which is the problem. So we really need to get at least 2 of those 3 seats, preferably all 3. Those 3 candidates are absolute rock stars. And, you know, I think that is a race that is going to be really key in terms of harm reduction, right? In terms of making sure that Ohioans can still get access while we're figuring out how to get it back for the entire state without restriction. As we've said, Roe is the floor, and so we are thinking about access in new and more expansive ways, but in the meantime, we need to make sure that we are doing the harm reduction practices to ensure that Ohioans can still get care. And I think that that's important to say to folks, especially who are getting ready to turn people out to vote, because I think I don't know about you, but some of my friends, you know, I say like, here's this whole big thing, and like, I need you to go vote for state Supreme Court. And they're like, well, that doesn't impact anything outside of Ohio. Like, what's that going to do? And as I'm sure we all preach to the choir here, like when like local is where it's at. I mean, we cannot trust the federal government to protect us anymore. They've made it abundantly clear numerous times that that's not what they're interested in doing right now. And we need to listen when people tell us things. So we need to look local. There are local protections that folks can put into place. We are asking people to talk to their local elected officials and their local candidates. We're going to be having some guidance going around right now for, you know, talking to county prosecutors across the state. I'm sure folks have seen some hype about county prosecutors getting involved. But really, when we are looking at November, we need to be looking at the state Supreme Court, the governor's race, and then also our attorney general's race. Cannot overstate the importance of those 3. I want to make sure that I'm hitting all of my things. Okay, so a couple of other things that folks can do. We are really, we do trainings. So if you all need more info, if you all, I mean, you all are leaders in this community, and you all have your own networks that you are, you know, the arbiters of, right? And so if there are folks that we can come in and talk to, and we can come in and train, we are desperate to do so. We offer trainings on messaging. We offer trainings on digital security on this kind of stuff. We offer trainings on, you know, how to organize around this stuff from like an action perspective. And just kind of all of the tips and tricks that we've learned over the years, how to talk about abortion, how to get people to want to talk about abortion with you, and all of that fun stuff. So I am wanting to be cognizant of the time. The only other thing that I would plug is our website, so prochoiceohio.org. If you go there, there's a banner at the top of the page. There's a, so the first tab is abortion clinics. That is a, I say comprehensive, there's literally only 9. There's a comprehensive list of abortion clinics in the state of Ohio. That's the first button. I believe the second button is a donate button if you're interested. Oh, that's my fundraiser would be so mad at me. Oh my goodness. If anyone is interested in helping fundraise for Pro-Choice Ohio for our electoral work, we are trying to, kick off that C4 side. And so we've had a lot of folks reach out with interest about hosting house parties or different like split benefit events. And so if anyone's interested in that, you can also reach out to me. I can like feel her glaring at me for not having. One of the other things that we have on our site is the Declaration for Reproductive Freedom. That's under the Take Action tab. I would encourage folks to sign on to that. And then we're also doing a social media campaign right now, but I'm not going to go into that because you can find it on our social media if you want to. I'm happy to take questions and I'm happy to hang out for a minute.
Yeah.
I think we both are. Yeah.
I just have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Please make sure you
Stand
speak
up.
up so that the cameras pick you up.
And stand up so we can hear.
This is Corey. I'll bring it to you. I'm sorry. I have a question about miscarriages.
Yeah.
What kind of risk do you when you have miscarriages? Face. So that's the first question. And then what do you make of the camping trip suggestions? I mean, this is real. And then suggestions to remove period trackers. I mean, yeah. So those are my three questions. And then I'm trying to comment. You talk about how important it is, the local elections. Yeah, all politics is local and right at home, and it's really wants that. I believe that strongly, and I just want to see how many of our local elected officials are today, so that they can see that. I see a couple, but I really do think that we have to locally is showing up for us. People that are in our own part.
I can like face the wall for a minute if you
Feels comfortable standing up and even at the most I just think that's important.
staff messaging training. So we'll come train your staff for you.
Thank you very much for being here. Yeah, it's really important to live that you see us and you're like.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, right? 3 times a day it knocks the wind out of me. And I do it constantly and it still knocks the wind out of me. Sorry, I'll take this back. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so first question was on potential criminalization of miscarriages, correct? Okay. So currently in Ohio law, pregnant people are not the ones being criminalized for the termination of a pregnancy. So when you, well, so it's hard, right? It's hard because in the state of Ohio currently, if you terminate after 6 weeks, you can be penalized, but also, and I think this is the root of the question, but also when you go to the ER and you're saying I have a miscarriage, there's no way to tell if you induced that or not. I am not a doctor, I am not a lawyer. So while it is entirely, absolutely 100% possible that some overzealous prosecutor somewhere is going to make it somebody's issue, that is quite the threshold that would need to be crossed, but it is absolutely on the table. I mean, when we look at things that get criminalized in our society, it's not necessarily always done reasonably, right? And especially when the thing being criminalized is something that is deeply rooted in people's personal experiences. And when the folks fighting against that right are rooted in a righteous belief, it makes it that much harder. So yeah, it is entirely possible that sometime in the very near future in Ohio, we could see folks criminalized for miscarriages. That is not, and I mean, we've already seen that in Texas. And in certain cases, I think that there have been a couple of cases where that has happened in Ohio historically, but there have been very specific like legal circumstances around that. But the answer is no, but yes. The second question that you asked was about period trackers, right? So I there are period trackers that are safe to use, that are done by companies who are committed to protecting your data. And also, none of our data is, and so odds are that ship has already sailed in some way or another. And so if a period tracker is something that you find to be a really helpful tool in your life, make sure that you're using one that is secure and is committed to being secure with your information. And also understand that like your info is really probably out there already, because big tech is, I promise I'm not a conspiracy theorist. It's just technology is a thing, right? Y'all? So the answer is, again, yes and no. It depends on your personal risk assessment. If it's a tool that's really helpful to you, keep using it. If it's going to help you detect being pregnant earlier, use it, right? Because we've got that 6-week time clock now. But also, if it's something that you're like, ooh, this makes me feel scary and exposed, there are other ways to keep track of that information. And you had camping. Thank you. I'm so glad that you asked that. So there are a couple of social media trends right now going around. It's like all over my TikTok right now, especially where folks in safe states or vacation states, and those are states that have decided
California.
or declared themselves to be safe access
Sanctuary.
states. So yeah, basically their political structure is stable and pro-choice, and so they can with confidence build their infrastructures to be destination states for abortion care. Again, without Roe, all of that depends on every election we have for the rest of eternity. So here's the thing with creating new networks. Folks have been creating these networks for years and years and years, decades. And so what we need now, and what we are hearing from folks who have been doing this work for a long time, is that we need to help those folks build their capacity. They have the networks, they have the information, they have the resources, they just need help scaling up, right? They need dollars, they need, literal people. But also the other thing with all of that is that this work is incredibly sensitive sometimes, right? And so if I have a patient who needs to access abortion care, I'm not putting that patient in a car unless I've vetted that person to infinity and beyond. In the history of abortion rights and abortion care, our movement has seen indescribable violence against providers, against escorts, and against patients. And there is no reason to believe that all, first of all, that's never stopped. And there's no reason to believe that that's not going to stop. In fact, we've actually seen an uptick in that behavior since Roe has fallen. I was actually at the clinic on Friday, and like a whole busload showed up and we're, weeping and celebrating and whatnot. And like we have patients all day. And they were getting in another car. They hadn't even seen the decision yet. And so, yeah, sorry, all of that to say, I am not just asking, I am begging. If you are interested in plugging into a network, in transporting patients, in raising money, please, 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 I am begging you, plug into the organizations and the folks who are already doing that work in your community. If you don't know who they are, that's totally fine. We'll reach out and we will get you connected. We cannot be reinventing the wheel because we have learned too much in the last 40 years to let all that information go, right? We need to make sure that people are safe. And we also need to make sure that people are supporting the work as it's been done by the people who have gotten us to, where we are with these networks. Those people are the reasons why folks can still get care. So we need to be showing up for those networks.
If I may add
Yeah.
to the camping, because, immediately the first thing you want to do is help, right?
Absolutely.
The people who are against this are going to be using that in a way to get to
Yeah,
us. People who are offering to be helpful and they have bad intentions. They're happy to hurt us. And so for your own safety, don't ever offer that to somebody you don't know, or like you said, want to get involved, make sure you're with a reputable place so that you're not, your heart's not in the right place, but something, your body's not going to end up in the wrong place.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think it's good heartedness. I hope it's good heartedness that people aren't really doing it's no more safe than picking up a hitchhiker on the side of the road.
Well, yeah, and also like those networks need people too, and so, yeah, if we can help, absolutely. Yeah, there's like camping, there's people like, I have a bed and breakfast you can vacation in, yeah. Yeah. Other questions? I saw, oh, I see a few, okay, I see a hand here.
This might be for JC.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, would a ballot initiative have some legs here in Ohio?
Go ahead.
Sorry. So a question was about a ballot initiative in Ohio, and I'm gonna take this one real quick, and then I'm totally gonna hand it over. So a ballot initiative is a tool in the tool chest that everybody is looking at. And so the soonest that could possibly happen, like because of the schedules and because we all know what running an election in an off year looks like, the soonest that could happen is 24, right? 2024. So personally, when I'm building my field program for 22, and like when I've been thinking about this, we are all building to that network in 2024. Taking on a ballot initiative of this scale is millions and millions of dollars, all of the staff at multiple organizations, and anytime we amend the Ohio Constitution, there are unintended consequences that nobody saw coming. And so that is absolutely something that is being explored, and also something that needs to be led by and with the repro policy groups and the providers who have been doing this work. So I know Nan put out a statement, was that just earlier today? Oh my God, okay. Nan put out a statement earlier today that like personally, I'm excited about. Like, I think that everybody should be declaring support for anything to potentially get us out of this. And also, if we try to do that outside of if we try to do that without the experts in this work, I think that there's gonna end up being a lot of things that we didn't anticipate. And so the answer is like, yes, it's coming, stay tuned most likely, but the soonest would be 2020.
Only thing I would add is that we don't want the other side codifying something in our state constitution that is negative to abortion rights.
Right, like that feels fun.
Like they have with the one man.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we have, so like on the House side, I didn't talk about legislation because they're recessed, and so it's not the most urgent thing right now. But we do have trigger ban currently introduced in the Ohio House. Hasn't really gone anywhere yet, but I imagine it will during the duck, and some other pieces of legislation that we can talk more about a little bit later in the year. Did that answer your question? Okay, I'm always happy to talk more about that. I saw a hand over here.
This might be a silly question, but I have been seeing things about essentially like a border control where you are not allowed to pass the state border. We're talking about prosecuting people who cross the border in order for abortion. Is that a thing that has legal legs?
I know.
That
It's fairly unprecedented. You know, the last time we're talking about that is talking about Fugitive Slave Act, things like that. So it's been a long time since that. Generally, that would be contrary to the principles of state sovereignty, but not to say that people aren't going to try it. The states aren't going to try it.
Texas.
Yeah, that's my answer. I'm not putting anything past them at this point.
I have a couple things.
Yeah.
My first question, because there's a lot of men here tonight.
Yes.
What is the main, maybe not the main thing, but a couple things that we can do as men to help women and to help your organization and to help this movement? I don't know, have legs and actually like see something. Second question is, can you speak to a little bit about how abortion affects the as well? Obviously women are people, also trans people as well. And there was something else talking about it.
Perfect. I should probably only try to take 2 of it. Awesome question, because I did not get a chance to go through messaging at all tonight. So I am going to very quickly leave folks with 2 things on this piece. So not everyone who gets an abortion or who could potentially need an abortion is a woman. We know that trans and non-binary individuals need access to reproductive health care too. If we're going to talk about some of the specific ways in which trans individuals and other folks who are not cisgender women could be impacted by care, for every man in this room, how would you feel if you got pregnant and were told that you had to carry a baby to term? Because if a trans man is told that, that's real for them. This also, as we're talking about rights to privacy and other access to healthcare, like gender affirming care is right there with it. I personally am a queer young woman who is chronically ill. I am like right on the border between chronically ill and disabled, and my pregnancy status could be one of the things that like flips that. And so, you know, this intersects in so many ways, as you just said, but also understanding that like when we're talking about the consequences of not receiving access to abortion care, I mean, I know that folks understand and can conceptualize the seriousness and impact in one's life, but I don't think that we often sit with it unless it's us or a loved one. And so, yeah, I think hugely in every aspect, queer folks will be impacted by this decision, both personally and like as a population, as a protected class. This is a slippery slope to nowhere good. Your other question was how men can. Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna say second to like donating to abortion funds if you're able, the single best thing that everybody here can do to help this, whether you're a dude or a woman or anywhere in between or outside of, we need folks talking about this stuff. This impacts everybody in this room. This impacts everybody that we love. This impacts everybody that we know. But we don't talk about it that way. We talk about it as a hypothetical. We talk about it as, you know, something that could potentially happen or at one point happened to someone that we knew. But that's not the reality of this anymore. As more and more folks are finding it harder to access care, I think folks are going to continue popping up in y'all's lives. And the important thing is to know that those people are always around you and they're always listening to how you talk about this stuff. If you only talk about abortion in the cases of rape and incest, that's telling someone who had an abortion because they wanted one that theirs wasn't valid. And that's really important to think about. You know, the way that we talk about this issue is how we legislate this issue. It's how we govern this issue. And so the single best thing anyone can do, but especially men, is figure out how abortion has impacted your life. Do it consensually. Do not be asking people for all of their trauma dumping, because that's not a thing that we're going to do either. But, you know, talk to the folks in your life. Make it known that you are a safe space for folks who have had abortion care. You will be floored at how many people come out of the woodwork. Every like person that I've gone to get my nails done for the past 6 months, I've gone to like 4 different people. Halfway through my appointment, they're telling me their whole abortion story. Just because I walked in wearing an abortion forever hat. Like, if you don't want to say the words out loud, just like buy some merch. You know, I like merch gets the bad rap sometimes because all you need is to start that conversation and then allies come out of the woodwork. I promise you, the overwhelming majority of Ohioans support this stuff. We've just been too scared to talk about it as individuals and as a party, and the time for that is over. It's done, and we can all do better, and I hope that we all will do better. Yeah.
So, the 6-week deal in Ohio, that applies to incest and rape, is my understanding. But I saw an article or something on social media that said, if the life of the mother is threatened, that like, let's say at 12 weeks or 24 weeks, that they can still get an abortion if that's. Is that true?
So that's a really good question. And you know what, I might get you a better legal answer. Do you have, yeah. Well, so again, I am not aware. So I will get you a specific answer to that because I don't want to accidentally fact lie policy to you. What I will say, the process to go through to get a formal life of the mother, and like I'm not using gender neutral language there because that's what the process is called. A life of the mother exception is something that is like quite the process to jump through. It's typically done within like hospital systems. And so the folks providing that kind of care are typically like hospital docs who have to go through an entire ethics board and all of that. So I will get you a better answer to that. And also any restriction to access is going to mean someone's not going to get access. So yes, good question.
So if they're dying on the table, they have to go through a board. That's insane.
So
Sorry, Ed.
no, well, and so this is a piece that we're talking about kind of for like the first time with all of this is this criminalization of doctor, right? Because it's not, they're not gonna necessarily take the person bleeding out on the table to jail right away. But that doctor in that moment is gonna have to make the decision of trying to save their patient's life or, you know, potentially going to jail. And like, I don't know about you, but my doctor does not seem super down to get arrested for the cause. Like, I don't normally go to my doctor for that. So yeah, no, those are very real implications. And like, there are similar implications that come with other legislation introduced at this level right now that just exists because of lack of clarity. The people writing these things don't know how doctoring happens or works. They don't know how the reproductive system works. And their policy reflects it. It's vague, it's confusing, and it's completely like logistically impossible. Good question. Yes.
I have a question. So how, I guess, does it get reported? Because, you know, after 6 weeks of these abortions, is it that like the doctors will tell you no, or if it like happens, like do they have to report it to the government? Isn't that a HIPAA violation for your doctor to give private information to someone that is not like part of that interaction? How does that work?
So here we see basically the bumping up between HIPAA and mandated reporting. And so doctors, nurses, social workers, teachers, others are often classified as mandated reporters, which by written law means that they are required to report, I'm gonna get the language wrong, but you'll know what it means. If someone's breaking the law in a way that is dangerous to themselves or others, that person is required to report it. The thing is, doctors are not agents of the state. So what doesn't get charted doesn't happen. This is another trend I've actually seen on TikTok is like the therapists are talking about like not wanting to code people's reactions to Roe because they don't want that documented. So the patient reacts to disturbing life event or something like that. And so there are ways that like medical professionals don't have to necessarily report if they don't believe that someone is, if they don't know for a fact that someone's breaking the law or anything like that. And so as we get into this really gray territory, you know, again, I'm not a doctor, not a lawyer, but I think that that's something to talk to your doctors about so that you know ahead of time where folks stand. But yeah, no, I mean, doctors and nurses would be the ones reporting. In Texas. That young woman was incarcerated for a miscarriage because I think it was a nurse or a social worker, called the cops when what had happened wasn't actually criminalized in Texas at that time. She still got arrested. She still spent the night at jail. Like they had to stage a whole grassroots operation on the ground to raise money and pressure to get her out. And so like, even though that young woman didn't break the law, she still felt all of the impacts that someone would have. And like, just going to jail for a night is a life altering experience. Imagine like doing that on the back end of miscarrying. So yeah, I just be careful with what you share with folks, know the folks in your networks, and also know that folks are mandated reporters, and depending on how they feel about what you're doing, could impact you.
Also, I'll put on my former prosecutor / defense attorney hat. HIPAA has a provision that police officers investigating potential criminal activity can write a letter indicating that probable cause exists and access your medical records. That's a warrantless search. There's not a reasonable expectation of privacy to the police, so they can access those medical records without violating HIPAA routinely.
I will also add, so crisis pregnancy centers. So there's 9 abortion clinics in the state of Ohio, and there's a whole lot of crisis pregnancy centers. And so those are like usually local health centers. The one near me is called like Better Women's Whole Care or something, and it's right next to a Planned Parenthood clinic. Those places are not bound by HIPAA. They are private entities. They'll take your information. They'll give it to whoever they want. And those places are like the havens and bastions for the people who want to do bad things to people who access this kind of care. We are hearing from patients in less than a week. We are hearing from patients who went to a CPC instead and are now too far delayed to access an abortion.
Wow.
Thank you. That was a very satisfying reaction. That's like super fucked up, right? So the other piece I'll add is that like, yeah, if you think you're accessing care through a healthcare facility that turns out is not a healthcare facility and is ready to turn your information around to the first person who asks, that is also a place where HIPAA does not something. I saw a hand back there. Yeah.
So I had a question about pharmacies and pharmacists, because it has been one. Yeah. And so, we have not seen anything from Ohio Pharmacy Association or American Pharmacy Association yet regarding that and reading the heart control and following legislation. The only thing so far that I'm seeing are criminal charges for doctors and potential, licensure things and penalties for them. But I'm assuming that the pharmacists will also be implicated. And I do know, number one, if you had seen or heard of any legislation that will do that. But also because abortion medication is going to become like the central piece of access via telehealth. And how that will function if you are a pharmacist operating in a banned state, but have a physician from a legal state, and whether you will still be able to pick it up at the pharmacy or if it will only be received via mail.
It's a really,
I know it is.
really good question. I have a kind of non-answer to it and also a new note on my to-do list to chase down whoever a pharmacist expert would be. I've got doctors, I've got lawyers, I've got nurses. I don't yet have a pharmacist. If your husband's interested. So what I can say on that piece is that under state law, terminating a pregnancy after 6 weeks is illegal, like in a clinic or not. Completely separately, completely unrelated. Self-managed abortion has existed since the beginning of pregnancy and is a whole lot safer than it was in the 70s. That's another messaging thing that we talk about. We see a lot of, imagery of coat hangers and those kinds of things. And that's just not what self-managed abortion looks like anymore. And so it's important for folks to know that that can be accessed like safely at home outside of a clinic setting. That is not something that I am going to or in a position to give advice on. I can expert folks towards some online resources. But that is a great question. And also part of it is that like we aren't sure where those bodies stand. And so I think that in a lot of these cases where there are like organized kind of systems like pharmacies, like organized medicine, where there are other political entities at play, we're kind of seeing who's going to be on our side, and then we're going to kind of see who we have to tussle with.
Well, I think they're hanging back to see where, because I guarantee that OPA will lobby for something, but they're waiting to see like who's coming at them and how hard.
Well, and also like, so the Ohio Academy for Family Physicians is I think working on, like they're having their conversation about all of this in their body right now. So I also think that in that organized medicine sphere, we'll start to see a little bit more action on that side. But for your specific question, I do not have an answer right now of how it'll impact pharmacists, other than terminating pregnancy after 6 weeks and outside of a clinic. Yeah.
And then kind of, I guess, going on that, I've heard a lot of interviews with a lot of articles about aid access.
Yeah.
Which is the international group.
Yeah.
And that's mailing in drugs.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what your opinions about that organization were, or whether or not that's something we should be promoting also.
So you're going to hear groups be very cautious around self-medicated abortion, around self-managed abortion. That is because if there is, we already know that we have an attorney general who is not our friend and is looking for any excuse to kind of take out some of the infrastructure that folks have built. So I love aid access. Those resources, Plan C Pills is another online resource that folks can go to. So we are able, you are not going to, no clinic is going to point you towards those spaces because it is a liability issue. However, it's really important for us all to know, for the people in our lives, right? So yeah, do a little bit of research. Aid access is great. Plan C Pills is another big one. And a lot of the non-direct service organizations are uplifting those folks. And a lot of those networks are working nationally and internationally, which gives them a better picture of the landscape in terms of like what's coming for us down the pipeline. Almost none of the stuff that happens in Ohio around repro is original from the anti-side. There's a group of folks who are committed to this stuff, and so the national networks can usually see that coming too. So yeah, answer your question, big fan. Big fan. Anything that's like rooted in mutual aid and getting folks care where they need it, big fan.
Yeah, I'll just keep going. I could go all day.
So,
Just on that same topic, the front page of the Times today describes how abortion pills are, the only way to access those in Brazil now is through drug dealers. So you have to go to the drug dealer that sells heroin, and that's how you get abortion medication in a country that has locked it down. That type.
I not to like make fun for drug dealers or anything. But
This is being recorded.
Mutual aid networks, so like not drug dealers, but I think probably folks who in some cases could be like labeled as like mutual aid networks work, right? And so we need to be thinking about how to get every person care where they're at. I carry like Narcan and emergency contraceptive in the same kit with me, right? Like we are talking about harm reduction at the state level at this point. And so, yes, no, like don't buy pills on the street, obviously, ever. And also, if there are mutual aid networks, first of all, please help me plug into them. We have emergency contraceptives to help get out, like all of that. But also understanding that that has to be part of this next chapter too. We can't rely on the institutions that have continued to fail us to be our saviors in this time. We're going to save ourselves. We keep us safe. We take care of us, and we're going to win this back.
in closing, we have one more person, John Mackley is going to come up. Please take a look at your tables. There are sheets there in particular that ask you if you have a skill or something that you can contribute. Please sign up, and John's going to talk about that. Again, thank you very much for coming out. And here, this guy has.
Thank you, Joel. Thanks for getting this together. Joel texted me last Saturday, and he said, I'm hearing from all kinds of people. They're like freaked out. You got to hold an emergency meeting. I said, okay. Called Larry. He said, okay. He called JC. JC said, okay. And then somebody called Cole, and she said, okay. And here we are tonight. I don't know if you know how effing important this election is. And I'm using what was her name? From the testified? Cassidy Hutchinson, yeah. So many times, they use foul language in the White House. So anyways, what I'm talking about, what Joel talked about is this sheet. I know a lot of you are here to find out how you can do something. Fill out this sheet. This is the Get Out the Vote campaign, because we must effing get out the vote this fall. We'll talk about these three ladies. Supreme Court justices. We call them the Supremes or the sisters-in-law. And so one of the things, actions we're going to be taking in July is writing postcards for them. Okay, so you give me your email, I will contact you and I will get you doing some action. So a few of the things that we're going to do is canvass your own neighborhood. Okay, a lot of people don't like canvassing strange neighborhoods, but this is your own. The postcards, of course, we're going to do voter registration. And another thing we're going to do is pop-up signs, pop-up yard signs. We're going to go to the busiest intersections in Richland County, and we're going to wave signs. We're going to start with Jennifer Bruner here. And that all starts on the 16th of July. Again, I'll have your email. I'll keep you updated for that. And I know it's been a long night, so I'm going to end with that. Talk to me afterwards if you have any questions. Thank you all for coming.
I just want to plug in real quick. I see a lot of young faces here tonight that I have not seen before. If you are wanting to get involved with a group of Democrats under the age of 40, I'm trying to organize young Democrats. So please come see me. And we also have our monthly meeting, July 18th. That's the third Monday, right? At 6:30 right here. So you can come meet us then. Thanks.
Yeah. And there's someone announced this. The Nan Whaley signs. There should not be a Nan Whaley sign left here.
All right, real quick, if you didn't hear that, there should not be a Nan Whaley sign left here after you all leave. Otherwise, I'm in trouble.